I have been a fan of pro wrestling ever since I was about 10 years old. In fact, I hold wrestling as one of the major influences in my speaking style. Seriously, there's a lot more overlap between pro wrestling and public speaking than you probably think there is. In fact, if you understood the psychology of how to book wrestling, you would understand public speaking in a very different way. Today's tip actually comes to you from the world of wrestling, inspired by the fact that we lost one of the biggest names in wrestling a few months ago when he passed away. He wasn't a wrestler though, but he was a pillar of that business from about the 1970s right up until a few years ago, and as I mentioned, in 2020, he passed away. And his name was Howard Finkel. We wrestling fans know Howard Finkel as the ring announcer for WWF or WWE. He had this great booming voice, and his opponent, coming down the aisle. What Michael Buffer did for boxing, Howard Finkel did for wrestling, only 1,000 times more. Because we wrestling fans internalized his voice, and we imitated him without even thinking about it. You know, after we wrestled in the schoolyard or played with our wrestling figures, we would do the announcement at the end, and without realizing it, we were doing Howard's voice. Here is your winner, and new heavyweight champion. Now you would think a speaking tip that is inspired by Howard Finkel would have something to do with your voice, but actually you'd be wrong. It's about something else. As we know, wrestling is scripted. We really don't like using the word fake because a lot of real stuff happens in wrestling, like injuries on occasion. But wrestling is choreographed, it's contrived, it's predetermined. It's storytelling. And the way you escalate the conflict in that story is with false finishes a lot of the time. A false finish is where one guy goes to pin the other, the referee gets down and counts 1, 2, and then the guy gets his arm up and the match continues. Yay, the hero lives to fight another day. You have a lot of these false finishes, they're all predetermined, and they're what gets the audience on the edge of their seat so that when the real finish happens, they can leap out of their seat. Now, what do false finishes have to do with ring announcer Howard Finkel? Howard Finkel wasn't just the ring announcer, which is how we know him. He was also the timekeeper. That meant he would sit there with the stopwatch and with the ring bell. He would ding ding tell you that the match was officially starting and officially ending. Now here's where that's important. You know those false finishes I talked about? Well, every time there was a false finish, Howard would lean in like he might have to ring the bell this time, and then, well, guy got his shoulder up, so I'm not going to have to do it. Now, Howard knew every one of those finishes was false. It was predetermined. But he acted like it was real. He sold it to the very end. Howard Finkel knew that the spotlight wasn't on him, the camera wasn't on him, but there were dozens or maybe 100 people sitting around watching him. And he knew that if they saw him sitting back during one of those false finishes, looking around, maybe having a drink, that he would be telling them, this is a false finish and you don't need to pay attention. Howard Finkel knew that just because he wasn't center stage didn't mean he wasn't on stage. Your speaking gigs are very similar. Your performance doesn't start with your first word and end with your last word. You are always performing for somebody in the audience because there's always somebody who can see you. That means when you take the stage, do you take it with confidence? Or are you kind of subdued and psyching yourself up? Because there's always a few people in the audience who can see you and they will talk to others. Now, when you're waiting to get introduced, do you look bored? Oh, come on, get on with it. I want to do this thing. And then put on your performer's face? Well, there are always a few people in the audience who can see you and they will talk to others. And when you finish your performance, do you say, oh, thank you, good night. You've been an excellent audience. But then when you're finished, you act like you can't wait to get out of there? Well, there are always a few people in the audience who can see you, and they will talk to others. Remember what Howard Finkel taught me. Just because you're not center stage doesn't mean you're not on stage. Every speaking engagement you have is an audition for another speaking engagement. And everything you do from the second you arrive at the venue until you leave that venue could convince somebody that they need to hire you again. Or it might convince them that they should not hire you again. You always need to be performing for everyone in the audience all the time because you never know how many eyes are on you at any given time. Do everything you can to sell yourself to the audience. You need to always be performing just like Howard Finkel was always performing. Just because you're not center stage doesn't mean you're not on stage. So keep it tuned here to lastrites.com for more speaking tips. That's last-WRITES.com. And together we, that's you and I, we will lay boring speeches to rest by giving them the last rites.